Men who use violence against women are the most insecure people that I've ever worked with.
Unfortunately, we live in a time and place where not a lot of men do have self-awareness.
What does safety mean to you? What does it look like? How do you act as a safe person in someone's life? How can we challenge the men in our community to become safer for our women? We want to be able to say, okay, well, here is the reality. Here are the numbers. They don't lie. But what are we doing about it as a community for all of our women and for all of our men that are experiencing domestic and family violence, but also the men who are the people using the violence?
It stems from obviously childhood, our parents. Some kids might have a great household at home, but then they get abused at school, they get bullied at school.
It isn't about demonizing, it's about saying it's okay if you've done it. You're human. Can we talk about some other better coping mechanisms? That's all I'm asking for here. How can we, women that are your nurturers, that are your lovers, that are your mums, that are your sisters, that are your daughters, how can we help you? And like I was saying, your podcasts are great because your demographic is a lot of men. You're putting on men who have had a hard knock life, who are coming saying, I've done this, I've done that, I've messed up.
Yeah.
But look at me now, look what I can achieve if I decide to change my perspective. And the truth is, if we change our perspective, we actually change our life.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
You're dropping bombs.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to Jono yesterday, and it's just been going on. And I haven't even taken creatine today, so it's all
there you go. John, oh man, I'm sleep deprived. My daughter was up at 3 a.m. and just wouldn't go back to bed.
How old is she now?
She's 2.5, but she's gone through some regression. I don't know. She's not sleeping.
It's normal. Very, very abnormal.
Jono was just saying, because he was like, man, 80% of our guests have suffered with domestic violence. You know, like that's if not all of our guests.
One of my favorite podcasts, and I forgot her name again. I don't know.
Jessica.
That was sexually abused and was so brave to talk about her journey, and even, you know, having the courage to talk about the impact of that. Yeah. For me, it's like, wow, well, how many other women are going to have a voice now because of her? Yeah,
she was definitely very inspirational.
Yeah, for me, she's been my favorite one to watch. And even the couple of guys you had on the last podcast, I thought that was really informative, and they're a voice. If they talk to the guys in their life and they tell them, well, let's not talk about control and insecurity, because power and control comes from the person's very insecure.
Yeah, and I do find, like, obviously if you saw the one, I think we dropped it a couple of nights ago, he was like as into the society, he's very masculine, you know, that's tattoos, bulky, bikey, and now he's, you know, I feel like they're the biggest leaders, because it's like, wow, if he can do it, then I can speak. He gives me voice, you know. So
I believe you're spot on there, and it's all comes back to one crucial element: are you safe for another person? We don't get in cars driving around like dickheads and playing dodge 'em cars. Yeah, we have road rage. It's called road rage for a reason, but the prevalence of it's pretty low compared to even domestic and family violence.
What do you mean by that? Are you safe for another person?
What does safety mean to you? What does it look like? How do you act as a safe person in someone's life?
As in, for other people do they feel safe around me, or do I feel safe around them?
Let's start with, do you feel safe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So how do you become safe for other people?
I guess by being nurturing.
Yeah. That's a great thing to do. How do you nurture someone?
Love.
Yeah. Do you listen?
Yeah, listening.
Pay attention.
Forgiveness.
Yeah. We're all human, right? Yeah.
Which really then says that, okay, then like if you're loving and you're forgiving and you're acting out of those emotions, then you're really like you're sort of healing trauma in a weird way, or you're overcoming trauma in a sense. Because doesn't trauma sort of make a barrier for people to feel love? They're feeling the opposite. Like if you're a subject of a certain trauma, whatever it is, which most people are, but for some people it gets bottled, and then in the later years of life, have you ever watched the movie Brothers? When he's a guy, he goes to war and he comes back. He's got 2 kids with a lady, and he dies at war, supposedly dies. And then like 5 years later, he's actually still alive and he makes it back home. Okay. And in that time, his brother was at home helping his missus with the kids, and they fell in love. Oh, okay. So he's come back to that, and then you could, like, the story just about like how he's shredded from the inside, but you could see he's hurting, he's screaming, that trauma's so deep. And like when someone's experiencing that, they can't love. They experience. That's when they experience that intense anger or the intense, and life is so intense at that point. So not giving them grace.
No, give them grace. They're in pain.
Yeah, they're in pain.
That's a great thing to identify. But can I be fair? We can, round 2 now, we're getting another chance to have a conversation together and hopefully, touch on things that people might learn something and have a takeaway. It's a good example. And why I think you've brought up a good example at this stage is the fact that when someone's in pain, it doesn't equal permission to inflict harm. But this is where self-compassion, and I know we spoke about it in the last podcast. So self-compassion relies on 3 crucial pillars. The first one's humanity, to see yourself as human and fallible. The second one is a really important one, self-awareness. And I remember in our last podcast, we touched on the self-awareness, because if you can be self-aware that you're shredded inside, well, does that create safety for anybody if you're struggling? And that's why reaching out to community support services, friends, family, with the feelings you're having, the big overwhelming feelings of loss, of grief, of disappointment, whatever it's characterized by, it doesn't give us permission to become harmful to other people, because things may hurt us. But if we face what's hurting us and reach out to, and I know in Australia we have a lot of great support services for men. Off the top of my head, Beyond Blue, Men's Line Australia, just to name, a couple. And I would also look at, who are your intimate support systems? So I think on that one, it's just identifying the importance of self-awareness and the choices that, come from those experiences of pain and hurt and trauma. And the last thing about self-compassion is self-kindness. So being able to not continue to impact harm upon yourself by inflicting it when you're around the people that are causing you the pain, but being able to self-separate. If that means you move away or you disengage or you self-protect. Self-protection isn't going to harm somebody. It's just going to remove you away from potentially escalating a already difficult situation. So I hope that's offered a little bit of clarity.
Yeah. And if like on this topic, if someone does have trauma, then they're most likely going to be, I don't know if the right word is influenced to put someone through, well, they end up with insecurities. And through that insecurity, then they're going to inflict the domestic violence on their partner or someone around them.
But when we look at sort of the baseline of domestic and family violence, we're looking about power and control. And it's got it reeks a very destructive pattern and a very damaging one for the victim. So the person using violence is maybe not exposed to other ways of dealing with big, hard, tough feelings. So they go into that ego space, and which is, constantly driven by this need to control and this need to dominate. But do you know what the baseline of all of that equals? Insecurity. Men who use violence against women as a way to get what they want and to dictate a particular outcome are the most insecure people that I've ever worked with. They're the ones that come with this bravado and this need to, feel stronger.
If you're still listening, thank you from the heart. These conversations aren't accidental. We approach them with depth and care. And if what you're hearing is resonating with you today, we've created something to walk you through beyond this moment. LC60 was designed as a real support, not a promise. You'll find it in the show notes. Let's get back to the convo.
And what is the baseline of control and dominance and power? Insecurity. Mm. So then let's strip it back a little bit more and talk about, what creates the insecurity? And then we can take that all the way back to childhood, what they were exposed to. Exposure is a really important part of the conditioning of a child's life. And again, how do we make our women safer? Even reading some of the statistics today was pretty, damning. It's 1 in 4 women in Australia experience domestic and family violence from an intimate partner. I do want to identify too, it's 1 in 16 men. So it isn't just women experiencing it. And I do want to identify that, again, there are community supports and programs and state funded supports for people experiencing domestic and family violence from their intimate partner. So why aren't we dialoguing about it more? Because it's an awkward topic. 39% of deaths in Australia are contributed to deaths at the hands of an intimate partner. 39% of crime in Australia.
Wow.
We're talking about loss of life here. Yep. In Australia is death at the hands of an intimate partner.
Wow.
And that's
massive.
Massively outnumbered by women, yes.
Is that stat bigger in the Indigenous community?
I like to say we're all people, and I know we can look at demographics, but I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
I want to stay really clear to say, how do we speak for women, all women? I decided to wear black today because I mourn the lives lost. One life is too many at the hands of an intimate partner. I mean, I have a visceral reaction to it. It makes the core of my essence, challenged and incredibly disappointed because we can do better. And that's where I draw it back to safety. So Indigenous, women from the Middle Eastern community, women of colour, we're all the same. We're all women. Mm-hmm. We're all women first. So it doesn't matter if it's from one over the other. It doesn't. One life lost is too many. Mm. If we talk numbers, it's, even worse globally. So sorry, Paul.
No.
I'd love to hear your voice.
No. I'm just thinking because, again, pattern on people that we've had on the show. In your experience, does drugs and alcohol play a big role or
Absolutely.
not as? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, good question, Paul. And, there is a higher prevalence of domestic and family violence and violence at the hands of an intimate partner. And when we say family, we're also talking about children. When there is drugs, alcohol involved, absolutely. Unfortunately, it also creates a very unsafe environment for anybody who becomes episodic in that violence. So we often talk to women through therapy and through the services that I work for in the domestic and family violence space and in the sexual violence space, because sexual violence is experienced in intimate partnerships. So I would say that the prevalence of that is, again, mind-boggling. We want to be able to say, okay, well, here is the reality. Here are the numbers. They don't lie. Okay, but what are we doing about it as a community for all of our women and for all of our men that are experiencing domestic and family violence, but also the men who are the people using the violence? So what are the fundamentals there? Do we continue to throw endless streams of money from a state level and a federal level to look at the lawmakers? So we look at, sentencing laws. Or do we think a little bit wider? Do we go back to education and those really fundamental years of exposing our boys to self-regulation for your emotions and teach them those emotional tools that will later on help them? And if they're exposed to that kind of information at school from a young age, even if they're children that are experiencing domestic and family violence and watch violence at the hands of fathers or mothers, they're able to say, well, I have another choice. I can find another way. Because we understand the damage on their kids, because we know what we grow up with. And it absolutely shapes the likelihood of us repeating that. And that goes back into intergenerational trauma stuff that we touched on in our last podcast. So
yeah, I think there should be, it definitely needs to stem back to the school, the education, like schooling systems. I think it's a no-brainer having this stuff in place, because kids go to school just generally, especially in high school, everyone's insecure. Everyone goes through those insecurities. Yeah. Everyone's just trying to fit in.
Talk to me about boys. I only know it from secondhand experience.
Just quickly, I want to just say, because we're on the topic, I just want to, what is the community? Okay, I understand education is the next generation and the people moving forward and preventing it from that level. But what does the community doing better now look like to you?
Oh, it's safety. Safety pops up every time. I was saying before.
What does safety look like?
Well, safety, I'll give you a really simple example that keeps coming up in my mind. When we jump in a car, are we playing dodgem cars on the road? Are we purposely turning into, hit each other's cars on purpose? No, we're looking left, we're looking right. There are laws. We go and get our L's, and what do? We sit a test. What does the test ask us about the safety signs? Why do safety signs exist? Why do lines exist? Why do we not do U-turns in particular spaces? Because the likelihood of having a car accident, and that's, your choices impacting somebody else. A car accident isn't just harming you, it could be potentially harming somebody else. So I look at safety as a measure of what are the choices that I'm making that are elevating my ability to create positive outcomes. Because safe choices equal safe outcomes. So again, I think it's a good question, but what does safety look like? Well, I think across the board, I think safety is about taking responsibility and identifying that being loud, being controlling, and using your anger as a form of intimidation, because it's a very common trait when, somebody kicks into being displeased. It's a very discouraging sign when they're choosing to use their body, their voice, even their facial expressions to force a particular outcome. And then we're taking away our right to offer somebody else safety, because it starts with the individual first. Everything's an individual experience first. So when we can take responsibility and remember masculinity doesn't have to equal aggression, doesn't have to equal control. And the truth of it is it actually equals vulnerability. The strongest thing a person can do is say, I'm angry. And when I'm angry, I feel it's difficult to communicate. So maybe I need a little bit of time just to sit with what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? It goes back to the fundamentals of regulation.
The problem is a lot of people don't have self-awareness. So they're not really looking at themselves from a third party. They're just being, and they don't. Unfortunately, we live in a time and place where not a lot of men do have self-awareness.
Yeah.
And in terms of safety, I understand your perspective on the road rules, but unfortunately in the home there's no rules. There's no public. We're in a private space. So it's a lot harder to have that enforced in a place where it's not public. There's no one's in there. It's just you. If I was, let's hopefully give someone some, I guess, advice, or if I was coming to you and I said, Maria, look, I'm a female. I've been suffering with domestic violence at home. What would be your advice, and what would be, yeah.
Well, from just a therapeutic lens, and you hold space and validate, because we aren't responsible to fix each other's experiences. We're responsible to hold space and offer safety that they don't have at home. First key point you made was violence at home. It's private, it's intimate. There isn't an audience unless there's children. And, the damaging impacts of it is just so unacceptable in this day and age. And you're right, a lot of people lack self-awareness. But Paul, I do want to say that there are ways that we can take advantage of the services available. I know there's a Changing for Good program through Men's Line. And the Changing from Good program, the philosophy of it is it's built on a positive behaviour change model. And that is just about teaching boys and men self-awareness. What is self-awareness? That when I make this decision, I'm becoming unsafe for somebody else. If I'm becoming unsafe for them, then I'm going to create an outcome that's going to create even more misery, even more destruction. Do I want to align myself with those core values? We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of anger and haste, and we jump in reactively. But what I'm saying is, how can we challenge the men in our community to become safer for our women? Okay? And this is, it does. The fundamental basics is it does start at home. So how can we educate men? It's a today problem. It's a yesterday problem, and it's a tomorrow problem. So is it going to heal itself overnight? No, it's not. But how can we sort of shake things up a little bit? Can we piss people off? Can people jump online and say, oh, this bitch is back, great. But what message, what are we talking about here? Are you safe for the people in your family, in your intimate private spaces? Are you providing these people safety? And then the question is, well, what is safety? Well, what's the opposite to safety?
Danger.
Yeah, spot on. So am I a danger to others? That's going to trigger self-awareness and self-reflection if any other question does, great, but that's a big one. And why it's important is because the dialogue is important. The exposure is important. 10 years ago, people weren't sitting around exposing the truth about, how many lives were lost, unless you may have turned on a TV channel and there was some newsreader reporting about another woman died at the death of the hands of their intimate partner. And, there are so many different types of domestic and family violence anyway. It isn't just physical. It isn't just sexual. We have a law that's been passed in most states now called coercive control. And it's characterised by control. That's the key element there. Intimidation's another big one. What do you think coercive control means? What else is it characterised by?
Probably like emotional.
Yeah, and psychological abuse, absolutely. It's telling somebody what they can wear, what they can't wear, how they spend their money, access to funds. It starts in those really insidious, small, one time, you get away with it, second time, and then this repetitive cycle of abusive behaviour begins to fluctuate in the relationship, and then the victim of that abuse starts to question their own sanity. Gaslighting's a massive one in the coercive control. It's creating an alternate reality for somebody that isn't true.
The problem is, if you're asking someone and that's being violent, do you think you're a danger? They might say, yeah, but I don't care. Like they might not even care. Like I feel like there's a lot of men lack the compassion, or like they feel like they're entitled, or I feel like it's a deeper problem than self-awareness too. Like it stems a lot deeper than.
Then we're talking about attitudes, right? That's an attitude. I don't care is one of the most defensive statements children use. So when children feel harmed or rejected and you ask them, are you okay? Oh, I don't care, I'm fine. And that's usually a teenage kind of typical response. So we talk about emotional maturity then. What's EQ, your emotional intelligence? If people sit in the I don't care, I don't necessarily think or believe that. I don't think it's true. I think you do care, you just don't know how to sit with it. It's really uncomfortable. It's hard to be accountable, isn't it, when you've messed up? It's hard to be accountable when you're a danger to others. You dissociate in stages where you've inflicted harm. We're not monsters, Paul. We're people with feelings, and some of us shut them down because they're too much. They're overwhelming. So I'd challenge anybody that says, I don't care. Okay,
yeah.
I don't care. Well, let's start with that, with I don't care. What don't you care about? And then tell me what you do care about. We are human. And that's the basis of the compassion. And I love that word because we did cover dignity and integrity and decency in our last podcast around how we treat each other. So again, I take responsibility for the choices I make. And guess what? They're not always 100% right. Sometimes I raise my voice. Like I went hiking with my young man the other day, and he's just an amazing go-getter. He loves leading, grabs the maps, and he's on the phone and, trying to do, off-road sort of, routes to try and make it harder. And I'm secretly dying in the background, but I just want to encourage his spirit. And at one stage we had to cross a bit of a creek, and I couldn't bear getting my feet wet while I was wearing the shoes. So I took them off, I tied the laces, wrapped the shoes around my neck, took the socks off and jumped in the water. And he was coaching me on how to cross this bed of water. And at one stage, what he was telling me to do, and he was shit stirring, which he's got a gorgeous personality, but he's like, oh, be careful, you're going to get malaria, taking the piss. And then I'm getting so annoyed, my feet are wobbly under rocks. My trust was in the fact that if I fell, I was going to be okay. It wasn't the end of the world. And he kept telling me, it's shallow, Mum, you're going to be fine. Now, he's young, getting exposed to nature, loving the idea of it. We got lost a bit, but we made our way back to the car. And the point of it is, if you don't risk making a mistake, but learning how to do it better, then are we even really in the human experience? No. And the story, we're not the sum of the poor choices we've made. We're the sum of our learning. So tell me about the poor choices and tell me now, what could you do differently? Could you find another way? And if you can, what does the other way look like? Are you safe? Are you a danger? If you don't care, well, tell me what caring looks like. Tell me what it feels like for you. Maybe they can't touch it the first conversation, but at least we're having the conversation. At least the next time I see you. I've done work with men that use violence as well. And I think one of the most important things is to go back to the philosophy of the positive behaviour change sort of model to identify what are the offending behaviours and how can we motivate you and expose you to knowledge and information that is going to make you safer for everybody, for all, and for self. So, yeah, I hope that in some part answers the question about the I don't care.
No, definitely. And you mentioned that you've worked with men who have been doing the violence.
Yeah.
In your experience, again, have they been exposed to violence themselves growing up? Is that normally where it stems from?
Yeah, a lot of it. Again, we talk about the propensity of drugs and alcohol escalating violence, and we also talk about learnt behaviour. So when we look at patterns and cycles, it's taken from one generation to the next. I think it's really a really good point to discuss, because a part of where I'd like to expose education to our young boys is that they also have a safe place in our schools to expose what they're experiencing at home. So if it's not dialogue that we teach our young boys, then how do they know how to use language around what violence looks like? So then if something is okay, so if dad slaps mum around, then that's normalised. And if that's normalised, the likelihood of them slapping their girlfriend around is going to increase as well. But I also want to add that a lot of people report that their very first exposure to intimate partner relationship violence starts as young as 15. So it's not just an adult thing here. It's also, I'm going to say it, monkey see, monkey do. We talk about it a lot, when we're raising our children. And there's a great book called Don't Enter the Jungle, when the kid's having a big, massive, big feeling, it's not getting roped into experiencing what the child's experiencing. It's about stepping back and, get regulated. You don't have to get drawn in. We can make other choices. So again, it comes back to, okay, well, if I need to expose myself to what these other choices look like, great, let's start there. So in my experience, I've worked with a lot of, I know maybe a controversial thing to say, a lot of well-intended men that use violence, but because they're not really aware that the violence they're using, such as coercive control, and I want to touch on coercive control, which has elements of financial abuse linked into it as well, and emotional and psychological, as we touched on before. So, it's...
Can you go into the bit of depth on coercive control?
Well, it's removing the other person's right to choose freely. I think it's an all-encompassing macro view on that one. It's such an, and why have they, provided such, crucial information around it now, even from a criminal law perspective. And I think one of the first cases that was somebody who was found guilty of coercive control recently. I remember I was reading some statistics about it as well, to highlight the damage that it does to the victim. So, dominating somebody, I'll underline dominate. When you think of dominate, what comes to mind? Telling somebody what they can and can't do, where they can and can't do it, who they can and can't see, where they can and can't spend their money. I mean, do we really need to take that sort of type of behaviour choice with people? But if we understand the impact of that, I've worked with many men that are open to working on their behaviour, and a lot of them identify a lot of loss comes from domestic and family violence. You lose relationships, you lose family, you lose children. And a lot of men, they're not coping with the emotions in a relationship. Can you imagine how they're not coping with the emotions out of a relationship? Talk, more about how we cope, drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol. Dr. Gabor Mate really touches on the trauma and the relationship with, trauma and, it's what happened to you. Drugs and alcohol is just a symptom of that trauma. And a lot of the times, that's a very common in Western world's coping mechanism. So again, how are we educating them with other options? But you need somebody who's open to it So my experience of working with men that have been open in that sort of more positive behaviour change, I often learn a lot from working with people that have intellectual and mental health, so intellectual disabilities and mental health issues. I also work at the capacity of as a positive behaviour change and intervention support practitioner, where I will go off and assess people with high-risk behaviours. Now, people with an intellectual disability have a much harder time of regulating their nervous system. So the point of my job is I go in and I learn about the environment. I learn about the people in their environment. How can we make this environment less provocative for you so that you can become safer for everybody else? But it's also safety to self. So I think there's no need to demonise or make men that use violence monsters, but what we want to do is expose them to other ways to cope. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, which is essentially like our mission in life. Like Paul and I coming together all those years ago was to just, show people there's another way to life, and that is by just working on yourself. And then by working on yourself, it leads to self-awareness. And then leading to self-awareness helps you to connect the dots and work out why you are who you are and where you've come from. So like it's just like it's a big circle loop, but I think it does. It stems from obviously childhood, our parents' relationships with each other, but then also with the kids, and the way they even interact with each other, and then it goes on to like schooling, because some kids might have a great household at home, but then they get abused at school, they get bullied at school, and then now that bullying over time
does psychological damage, and that's what
damage.
A lot of women and men that are victims of domestic and family violence report back. So imagine a child being bullied. Now multiply that by 10 times worse if you're in an intimate relationship. So that person doesn't just become unsafe from a physical lens, they could become unsafe from a psychological lens. We talk a lot about narcissism, and I know it's such a really heavily used word in our society, but I also don't want to sanitize it. There are traits of narcissism that are very predominant in domestic and family violence. There's, incredible people and practitioners in the space like Dr. Ramani. She's an incredible psychologist that has done some, historical work in not just how to live with a narcissist, but also working with victims of narcissism and narcissists themselves. So what we now is exposure and education. So do I really want to be someone that is behaving that way and becoming and remaining unsafe for other people? I'll bring every conversation back to safety. Is that a safe choice? We say it with our children. If they're about to jump into a body of water and they're barely 1 or 2 years old, we have the state laws around fencing around pools. Why? To keep our kids safe. So can we look at how do we keep our kids safe in families, in homes, with whatever our family looks like? So again, I also want to touch on the responsibility of the leaders in our communities and touch on our religious leaders that do have a lot of impressionable young people as their audience. How can we be educating our community members of any spiritual organisation to educate the men and the women? Because sometimes women are perpetuators of domestic and family violence because of the way we choose to raise our children. So are we saying that it's okay to be treated this way and there's no consequence? So again, it's all about, I don't want to say it's about wokeness. It's not. It's about safety. How are we safe? Is that a safe choice? And how do we measure safety? So, we can look at safety from a building perspective, Paul. Why do we have laws in place for people to be wearing hard hats on sites?
Keep them safe.
And how many people had to die before those laws were changed? So my question is, how many more women have to die before those laws reflect a certain level of care for the women in our community?
Yeah.
For all.
I want to just quickly touch back on coercive control. Do you think society somewhat plays a part in that dominance of the male. Like, I feel like there's a stigma of like the man, and I'm not saying that we have this, but there's a lot of men that have that, like the man is in control, the man is like, where they've got it in a toxic manner. Like it's not, and I feel like it's been given and they've taken the information and fed it back in the wrong way. Whereas like you're meant to nurture your wife. Yeah, she might stay, some of them stay home, look after your kids. And yeah, you're in control financially maybe, but you're not in control of that person. I feel like it gets mixed up a little bit.
Good question. So do you know one of the most common reasons why women don't leave abusive men?
Because of the finances.
Finances, spot on. Imagine that. Put yourself in her shoes. What then?
Also, to the finances, could there be an element of sometimes if the man is that masculine dominant type, yes, it gives her abuse, but that could also make her feel safe sometimes, or no?
Oh no, absolutely not. But
could it be like a delusional safety mechanism where when I'm with this guy, I feel so safe because he's so tough?
Yeah, but if you're out and you're walking down a laneway at 2:00 in the morning, of course it's not. It's okay.
Not an everyday
Nothing wrong with big, beautiful men that protect their women, big, beautiful men that protect their men. Who cares? And I'm going to touch on who cares on purpose. What matters is that feels safe to me if we're putting it in context. But I do care when that turns into what we're talking about, harm. When that very thing that was something that attracted you to that person becomes the very thing that starts to harm you in the relationship, then is that masculinity and strength useful?
It's toxic.
But was the female attracted to that person when they were in that like masculine dominant state before they even got with them? Like, is that sometimes why they get pulled to that person?
You know, again, I think the conditioned childhood dictates a lot of the choices we make. And it's not always conscious. It's a lot of subconscious, what we're attracted to. And we tend to stick with what's familiar. So again, if you grow up in families where dad was dominant and mum was submissive, then we're just playing that out. It's just patterns.
I was just thinking, like, it's very common for, like, obviously, let's say my father was abusive, I become abusive. Yeah. But on the opposite end, it's like if I was a female and my father was abusive, I find it normal to then be with an abusive partner.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
You know, it does normalize the behavior because if you grew up with somebody who punches holes in walls but didn't punch your mum in the face, would you say that's violent behavior?
Yes.
Spot on. Do you say it's violent behavior? Yeah, it is. So I think that violence isn't just determined from a physical. It's also violent environmentally. Throwing things is considered as violence as well because it's also in line with intimidation. You throwing something across a room is trying to draw what reaction from the person that's the receiver of that choice.
What about if the guy throwing the thing across the room or punching the wall wasn't because of something that his family did? So what if it was an external force? So he's fine with his family, but he gives off that behavior after a call or with work interactions.
Well, if we're
is that
talking
still
about
abusive?
What people see in your family, again, is it safe? And I would say it isn't about demonizing. It's about saying it's okay if you've done it. You're human. Can we talk about some other better coping mechanisms? That's all I'm asking for here. How it's not about, our boys, our men, you need to do better. Okay, but how? How can we help you? How can we, women that are your nurturers, that are your lovers, that are your mums, that are your sisters, that are your daughters, how can we help you? But I don't mean that from a lens that we have to, because we want to create safer spaces in our homes.
I feel like, again, I'm not no excuses and a little bit of grace, but like, what if you're with a female, and again, there's obviously better mechanisms, but she's manipulative and she's abusive and she is a bully and she's doing all these things, and you're not giving it back, but through your mechanism is to like punch a hole in the wall, Is that, where do you draw the line, or is it just like strictly no violence? Like, as in, I feel like women also, not in every case, but sometimes the man could be, and not to say lead to violence, but women could also be part of the issue. It's no excuse to ever hit a woman. I'm not saying that.
I know where you're coming from. And again, I don't want to sanitize anyone's experience of manipulation, because it's really sort of confusing, isn't it? When your body's telling you something and your mind's not quite processing at the speed of the information being received. I think you've brought up a good thing. But again, what choices are you making? You're responsible for the choices you make. If they're 100%. Being manipulative, that doesn't belong to you, man. Give it back to them. Name it. I think in relational intelligence, it says it feels like you're being manipulative, and break it down. When you choose to say these things to me in this way, this is how it's making me feel.
Yeah.
And again, that's a really good coping style. I don't think silence is going to protect you. That's for sure. It never has.
Yeah.
So some people will become dissociative in those moments because they don't want to stir the pot.
Yeah.
So if the woman's the person that's using violence, because violence, as we've all agreed now, isn't just physical, but punching holes in walls isn't to say you're a bad person because you do it or you've done an awful thing. It means, what are you carrying? Get curious. Ask her, why are you choosing to speak this way? I'm wondering, did you have to do that when you were a child to get what you wanted? Who reinforced that behavior? Who was a person in your life that you saw do that got particular outcomes? Why can't we become more curious with each other? I think that's a safe choice.
I love that approach, but I feel like it's way easier said than done.
Yeah, and masculine rage, like I feel like it's a thing. Like, as
great.
in,
that's why there's boxing rings to get out there and boxing bags. And
that's a good point.
Take yourself out to the garage and go and buy one, strap one up to the roof. And
you also made a good point where, like, if you're in a situation, it's not the other person's fault; it's your fault. Whether or not that person is that bad for you, and you're still there punching holes in the walls, it's your fault because you had the decision to make, and you're still here. You're still copping the abuse. You can remove yourself from the situation. You can remove that person.
Exactly.
If you're still there, you can't blame the other person. Right. You can blame yourself.
You know, so manipulation is one of the characteristics of narcissism, and you don't have to be a full-blown narcissist to have some narcissistic traits in a relationship. It just speaks on what you had to learn to do to survive in your environment. And, you know, also your brain believes what you repeat. So I want people to get back into their bodies. And a part of, you know, so many great therapeutic practices like somatics, there's some, you know, if you want to jump online and check out some somatic grounding techniques when you are feeling enraged. If you physically disengage by naming the way this person's making you feel, then you're actually giving yourself the upper hand because you're becoming what? Safer for self and safer for others. I know we say, oh, but she forced me, because it's something I hear often. Well, that's really good information. Thank you for sharing that. So what's happening to your body when you feel forced? It's no longer about the other person. It's about you. So when you feel forced, what's your usual go-to? And people will often say, you know, I've done this, I've done that, I've thrown things around, I've gotten my keys and jumped in a car angry. I'm like, well, we don't want to promote that either, because then you become unsafe for self and others again. So what can we do? And we start to curate an opportunity for the person that's used violence, who's open to learning to try something different.
What would those tools be?
Well, self-awareness is the first one. Openness is a really important one. I think openness tells me that you are capable of accountability. If you're curious and that curiosity leads to different choices, then I think it all starts there. And then the tools look like the coping mechanisms. What are you doing? What am I doing? And how can we create safety for self and safety for others?
Yeah, more so in a situation where, let's just say you're in a relationship and you are feeling enraged and you are, you know, you do resort to violence. And let's say I was coming to you and I'm like, hey, you know, I've got the self-awareness, but I just can't help myself. You know, I'm really enraged. She gets me to a point where, you know, what would there be, like, do I start breathing exercises? Like, what advice would you give to someone that comes to you that is trying to do better?
Early intervention. So as you start to escalate and you feel your body becoming more tense, I would name, this is probably not a good time to have this conversation. I'm thinking I need to take 5, 10, 15. And taking that crucial step in that sort of early identification of a potential escalation can, you know, completely shift the course of that interaction. And also disengagement's crucial. So manipulation, meeting it with, oh, thanks for sharing that. It isn't to dismiss, it's to identify. That if that person is in a cycle of behaviour that triggers a violent reaction or response in you, and I think the baseline of it could be just feeling unheard. It doesn't start big, it starts small sometimes. And again, we're talking about interactions where you have the mental capacity, which means you're not affected by drugs or alcohol either.
Yeah.
We're talking about the openness it requires for a person to identify right at the early stages of a potential escalation that they're going to choose to remove themselves so that they can be safe for self and safe for others. And that's where it starts. I think that's the most crucial element here. And we can sit here and we can talk about global statistics. We can talk about the statistics in Australia. But what are we doing about it in the early intervention stages? And what are we doing differently now with all the information we do have? Because everything is information. So, and again, we come back to exposure is key. So if one person watches this conversation we're having today, okay, that says, you know, I might jump on and call Men's Line because, you know, yesterday this really awful thing happened and I feel bad about it. A lot of the men that, you know, use violence talk about how awful they feel. So, okay, let's work with that. Means you're capable of empathy. And if you're capable of empathy and taking responsibility, and we come back, it's difficult to work with people that blame. And I know that we touched on that in the last podcast, you know, blame's just an expression of pain. It's something they can't sit with. So that takes a lot of time, but openness to be able to shift those sort of mindsets, not impossible. So again, it's about what do we learn from the choices that create the shame and the guilt, and what are we doing differently about it? So if one person watches it and says, I'm going to jump and chat with somebody, trained professionals on Men's Line, and there's also a really good program through Men's Line, and you can jump online for anybody that's watching it in future. It's called the Changing for Good program. Again, a really well-intended plan for people using violence. So we're not just talking about how do we stop violence against women or how do we stop domestic and family violence and intimate partner violence. Well, we're actually talking about the root cause. So
you're actually calling on the man who's experiencing the anger to make this call.
Yes.
Because I think every single male, when they do something that requires deep anger or whatever, they feel shame afterwards. They do feel bad the next day or the next hour.
Yeah. And that's the humanness that I want to connect with, to say that, you know, that's something that you did. That's now past tense. What can we deconstruct, take out of that, and how can we now formulate a skill that's going to be curated to your personality, to your ability to identify something earlier than later? Okay?
Yeah. If you're drawn to these conversations, chances are you care about how you think and how you feel. Our C60 was created for that intersection, supporting your body while you do the work. It's linked below. And from a masculine perspective, like after an episode of rage, even though they'd be feeling shame, they have such a strong ego that they probably will never even bring it up to the partner, or they don't actually work on it. But if they could call up one of these, you know, these hotlines, they're now speaking to a random person, and they can actually be vulnerable.
Yeah, and there's some great therapists in the domestic and family violence space, and every state also has. I know in Australia or in Victoria, there's Safe Steps. In New South Wales, there's the New South Wales Domestic and Family Violence Line. There's 1-800-RESPECT. That's a national telephone service, and the scope of that service is domestic and family violence, offering information, counselling and or referrals for anyone impacted by domestic and family violence, sexual violence and workplace sexual harassment.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to touch on the workplace as being safe. That's that psychoeducation space. How do we keep those dialogues open with the people that we work with, so that if we are experiencing domestic and family violence and we do take it to work, well, you know, is there a program? Is there somebody? Is there a manager that could help us to at least start talking about it? Not just from the victim perspective, but, you know, you work with a lot of men, Paul. I'm sure you've heard so many stories that, you know, you could bang out a few examples now. they need a place to go too. They might be experiencing domestic and family violence, or they might be identifying that they're a perpetrator. We want to say, let's create a space. Like, so many examples of safety. And again, we have to take responsibility. We don't drive a car till the tread is so low that we potentially risk the people in the car with us and our own lives.
Yeah.
We take, and I bring up car examples because we're talking to men and even to the women that, we just had the Formula One this weekend too, just to bring, draw the parallel there. But I just want to identify that safety doesn't just have to live in the extreme spaces. It lives in our day-to-day without us even thinking about it.
Yeah.
So now let's think about it. So when people come to you, when they're opening up and they're having a hard time, I need a day off, or I need a weekend off, I'm having a rough time at home, or my missus left me,
Be supportive.
But you being able in that moment to be impactful. So what led to the breakup? How can we emotionally educate each other with support as well? Yeah. I don't think it's about being right and wrong anymore. It's about how can we be more safe for each other, safe to self and safe for others. And I hope everybody that decides they want to watch the podcast today can take away that the most critical word we use today is safety. I hope I use it over 1,000 times, because I think the most important lesson to take from even watching this today is how to be more safe. So don't be ashamed of what's been done. Let's talk about what can be done differently moving forward. That's what I'm more interested in.
What do you reckon are the main stresses out there at the moment? Like, what is the thing that stresses a man out the most?
Well, you tell me. I can tell you, I've been on the receiving end of people I get to work with, because I have about 30 couples I'm working with at the moment, and I work with a lot of men in that space.
Yeah.
And I appreciate a lot of them, and I've learned so much from them, because men and women, because what I'm learning is how we trigger each other in relationships. That adds stress as well. So tell me a little bit about, Jonathan, I'm going to give you back that question.
Well, the reason why I ask is I would say that personally, like the way if I'm overlooking this as a bit of an overview, you see, okay, there's men with traumas.
Yeah, we all have
which leads to unregulated nervous systems.
Sure.
Now, if you're going day by day with an unregulated nervous system, but the experience of life is somewhat calming and not so stressful, as in day-to-day economics, day-to-day, the way that the country's being run, all these factors, factors outside your home impact a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what I'm thinking of, like, because this stems from, I was going to ask you the question, how long do you reckon domestic violence has been going on for? Like, is it something that we can date back to thousands and thousands of years ago?
Yep.
And would it have been worse back then, or easier, or worse, or not as bad as now?
Can I be a bit, specific?
Yeah.
One life is too much. One encounter is too much. So when we have multitudes, historically, it's not good enough. We need to be doing more.
I'm not coming, the angle isn't to justify it. It's to work out, is it worse now because of social media, because the coping mechanisms aren't good. Yeah. Whereas back in the day, you didn't have social media. So you might, let's just say thousands of years ago, I don't know how it would have worked, but the male might come home and then he's playing with his kids. They go for a walk, they go for a run, or they're doing more nature-based activities, which means that's going to naturally just regulate their nervous system, which means less instances that they need to have an episode, is what I'm trying to say. Even if they had a deep trauma, at least the experience of life around them is sort of keeping that contained. Whereas now, especially now, I'm talking like this day and age, I think most men would be coming home. You got like the media just projecting the worst of the worst, and that just creates fear. So automatically, how can anyone right now with the war that's going on, the war isn't the problem. It's the way the media projects it, and the way the headlines come on, and all the stuff that is invoking fear on a day-to-day basis for the person. The war's a separate problem, but I'm narrowing in on the way society is making us feel day to day. You know, you jump on social media, same thing. There's the headlines. And it's not just the war, it's everything. They're constantly just projecting fear. They're invoking people to just feel stressed. So now, naturally, even if you come from a deep trauma or not a deep trauma, your central nervous system isn't regulated. Yeah? Which then means that more people are going to have more episodes. They're more stressed out.
More drugs, more alcohol.
Yes. Yeah. And then you look at the government and the way the governments are running the country, and then it's like a whole nother thing. And it's like, where is this going? You know, so like, yes, the people have the problem, they have the trauma, they have the unregulated nervous system, but there is all these external factors that are not making it one bit easier.
On a global scale, it's one big gaslight. Who knows what the truth is? And yes, historically, fear has always been the center of the narrative. So without us going down that road, I will stay away from the political side of it and I'll strip it back down to the simplicity of it. Yes, traditionally and currently, external factors like financial stress is one of the most really common documented contributors of stress in households and family. You know, having a child that might be neurodiverse or going through getting a child in the family off to see a psychologist, and then, they realise that there might be an autism spectrum diagnosis. There could be things that we don't see coming that create it, loss of a person in the extended family, loss of autonomy. Any of these will be contributing factors to stress. Stress is a part of living. Now, I'm not about managing stress. I'm very much about elimination of stress. I think that's a whole other podcast topic I think we can get into, because there's some incredible people at the moment, educating us about the elimination of stress. So we have to learn ways to cut out the noise, because the noise is confusing. Putting on the news, hearing about what's happening is devastating. We're people we identify as Lebanese. And look what's happening to our country today. What's changed? Why did our parents leave the country? Okay, that's on a mass scale. It's on a global scale. And it's abusive, isn't it? It's the abuse of power. So we can talk small scale, which is immediate family, extended family, community violence. We can also talk global. It exists on, in the hierarchy somewhere, everywhere. The thing that saddens me the most is, where have we lost our humanity all these years, all this education? Where have we lost our humanness? We are one race, by the way. One. We're humans first.
But that's my point. As a human, you go day by day almost knowing that you're human, and I know you don't want to go political, but they create the divide. It's constantly being created every single day.
Yeah, but that's because a divisive narrative creates destruction, gives them more power, and we can continue to, play around with the more sort of political global topic, but it's pretty devastating. How disappointing, how disgraceful. We talk about sexual violence and look what's in the media today. So again, when I talk about the media, I talk about people in power, being offenders. What are we glorifying?
Yeah.
Anyway, again, I want to stay within family. I want to stay within community.
Yeah.
I think that's where it starts. Sorry, Paul.
No, that's okay. I just want to one last thing on this topic. Like, for example, are the statistics in Australia and I guess America a lot worse than, for example, like a well-run country like Dubai or Singapore? Like, what are the stats there? Do we know if it's...
I think, culturally intersectionality plays a big role. So, culture versus religion versus gender identity. In the community now, with transgender people, violence against people from the LGBTQI plus community has regressed. It's increased. And just to name, one of the intersectionalities of the human race, and what we're finding as well in culture dictates attitudes. So when violence against women is normalised, then that's what young people are growing up normalising, And that's what's being perpetuated generation after generation after generation. But again, one act of violence is too much. I don't want to paint it with a cultural brush.
Yeah.
I want to say it's a human responsibility to be safe to self and safe to others, with a massive full stop at the end of that statement. Not if, and not maybe, and not but, and not and. Full stop. One act of violence is too much. And I absolutely take responsibility for every decision I make that's ever inflicted the slightest harm on anybody. I will be sorry, I will be mindful, and I will take responsibility to learn from that, to do better. Because when we know better, and Maya Angelou at her greatest, when you know better, you do better. So, 15 years ago, it will be Dad's 16-year anniversary of his death. He passed away in May of 2010.
Wow.
And what did he teach us? He taught us so much, but not just from his amazing choices, but also from his challenging choices, his hard choices. And he was really human. So by the time I became a young adult, he wasn't seeking any level of perfection. It was all the levels of imperfection. And he was learning on real time, the same way we are too. So he's, my mother as well, she's been a crucial educator of emotional intelligence. It was always, but what did you choose to do? What did your choice look like? And violence in our day and age has become more normalised, especially around the young, teenage. It's the teenage between the ages of about 13, I think, and 20, 21, that are the most significant perpetuators of violence in our community. So, and that's increased.
Yeah.
And, I was speaking to a wonderful person a couple of weeks ago. We gave a talk, it was called the Interfaith Forum, talking to faith leaders in how we can educate their communities into the opportunities that people have to choose to not use violence. But in order to do that, we need to be accountable to the choices we're making to be safe for self and safe for others.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it boils down for me to education and taking responsibility, and also not our silence.
Again, the place that you live in and the government that's in control, like look at Dubai, there's no violence on the streets in Dubai, like as in it does play a big role. It does stem from the environment or the place that you're living in. It actually does play a big role. Yeah. Like as in Melbourne at the moment, like it's out of control. Like, but it doesn't stem from the kids, or it does. It starts there, but there's also a bigger problem at hand than just the violence on the street. Like I said, I'll use Dubai as an example. Like there's better rules and regulations in place to suppress those things, whereas we don't have that here, which is part of the problem.
And again, I don't want to be a person that dictates what's right or wrong. I just want to be somebody that's open to understanding. So if I can understand, and I've been to Dubai a few times, and I think for whatever it's worth, they surveillance.
Yeah.
They have surveillance laws. They also have corporal punishment. And it's a little bit like, does the crime fit the punishment? So, the crime for stealing is a lot more extreme than we'll say Western countries would be. So the deterrence of anyone's likelihood of, engaging in that sort of decision-making around stealing, for example, then definitely you'd be deterred, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Just from a human perspective.
It's a lot deeper than that though too.
Of course it is. It's cultural too. Yeah. But we're also sending a message to people that have intentions to commit crime. So, it's the bigger the punishment, then the likelihood of that crime becoming a reoccurring crime is a lot less likely. So again, without being somebody in the law space and understanding what constitutes and governs the laws in our country, all I know is, it does feel safer to take your wallet out and put it on a bonnet of a car and leave your keys there and walk across the road and watch to see if someone takes it in Dubai. Yeah. And many people have often done it as a joke.
Yeah.
And no one will go near their stuff. That's great. But at what cost does that come? I don't want to make somebody responsible because somebody is watching. The sheer nature of integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. Why do people have to be watching for you to do the right thing?
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to accountability. I'd love to walk into a shop, take whatever I want, and the person in the shop goes, no, you can have everything for free. It's not stealing it. It's being given it, right? So why can't we give each other things that don't have to look like tangible things? Why can't it be a good feeling when you leave the shop?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm more interested in is feelings, information, education. I don't want to demonize a particular gender. I don't want to demonize people having the right to learn. But the question is, are you open to learning? Because if you're open to learning, then you're a safe person. Okay?
I agree.
And that's what for me, that's what everything boils down to. Safety first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, being open to learning means like you've got that self-awareness state. Like, and I think like for me through the journey of my life and the wisdom that I've, that's been passed down is like, we're here to serve. We're here to serve others in every interaction.
It's beautiful.
But to get to that point, yes, you do have to go through things, but also you got to just be in a state where you're open to learning.
Yeah.
And you want to learn, you want to be better. Yeah. Like what is the best version of myself? Even forget the others, even within myself, what is the best version of myself? It's choosing the right coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. Can I ask each of you a question? Is there something you're taking away from today's podcast?
I wanna really dig deep into this and work out how, because we can talk about this for days, but what is the how? How do you make that change?
Well,
because I think day to day we're trying to make that change through the awareness. We're spreading awareness. We want people to be more aware, not be so blinded by everything that we're sort of framed to be through schooling, universities, and like the media and just everything kind of is always pushing everyone in that direction, But also, when this is a thought that I had over the weekend. If you were going to create a game, and that game was the game of life, if everything was perfect and everything was easy and everything just ran so smooth, then the game would be boring. Like when you're making a game, you got to make it hard. The good food is harder to find.
Okay.
The good traits are harder to find. The trauma is so present because that's the point of the game of life. And if you view life as a game, if God was the creator of this world, this experience, then it's going to be challenging. There's going to be so many things that we have to face. So then we can play the game and be more in a state of winning. Then you need to be self-aware. You need to make the right choices. It's not going to be easy. The reason why Coles and Woolies have everything so accessible that's not good for you is there for a reason. Because you got to go out to find the
I don't want to digress from the domestic and family violence, and I just want to state that should be easy. That shouldn't be a hard one.
Which one?
Safe to self, safe to others, full stop. Domestic and family violence relies on people making choices, people being in moments of maybe rage. How much in control of your body are you when you're in rage? Not very much. It speaks of impulse control issues and the nature to express, right? Every human needs to express. Now, we can talk about Coles and we can talk about Woolies and the big monsters that they are when it comes to sort of, the supermarket wars. But I want to talk about, it's so important to understand that if life was a game, I hope domestic and family violence was never a part of it.
I agree with that.
Okay. Challenges can come from learning how to become a better person, how to become a more community-minded person, how to be somebody who can grow wealth and share it. Why do we need that many billionaires, the 1% of the billionaires that exist in this world? Why? Because they're greedy MFers. That's why. Because it's all, well, what's the point? Where are you taking it anyway?
But it's not just the game from a financial perspective. I'm not even talking about the billionaires. I mean that if your body, if you have high omega-6s, you're consuming seed oils. Forget Coles and Woolies. You're just consuming seed oils unconsciously. Your body's riddled with inflammation.
Yeah, you're right.
Which then in turn gives you an unregulated nervous system and you're more prone to rage.
Yeah. So we talk about education.
So it's stemming from the food. Yeah.
So look at Japan. Japan's the best. Look at what they feed their kids in schools.
What do they feed their kids in school?
Oh, incredible foods. Very well balanced diet. They have dietitians on that are employed on school boards, in schools to create.
And how does that correlate
plans
to domestic violence in Japan?
Well, you spoke about seed oils, inflammation, and they're making people feel not so good inside. You know, that could be a contributing factor. Anything could be a contributing factor. What I'm asking is are the rates lower in Japan for domestic violence? Well, I think if we're talking about food, that's something that I won't comment on because I don't know the exact numbers. But we talk about, again, culture. And we talk about, is it normalised in their culture? My answer to you is I don't know.
Okay.
And that's definitely something I'll look into after we've chatted today.
Yeah.
And it's okay in the sense that I want to draw it back to the fact that if there's one act of violence, I don't want to blame culture. I don't want to blame religion. I want to say, what are we doing about teaching our young men and women to be safe to self and safe to others without sitting in the aftermath of the damage, the destruction. The keynote of this whole session today for me, I need it to resonate around how do we become safer. Education is key. You mentioned the food example, so I thought about Japan because we look at the rate of obesity in a country like America and Australia versus the rate of obesity in a country like Japan. So food does impact. I think everything does. But if we go back to the story of the game of life, well, Jonathan, I would hope that human nature would dictate safety first.
Yeah, I don't think it's in alignment with God's game.
No. Yeah. Well, we don't read a book called the Bible about how God, I'll strip it back to Jesus in the New Testament, went out with the intention to harm anybody and then justified the harm because he's doing God's work. I mean, let's say that one again. It sounds pretty ridiculous.
That's not essentially what we're saying. We're not justifying it with anything like that. Like I think it's more just religion is there, the Bible's there, but there's still all these other things happening outside of domestic violence. There's still all this other bad stuff.
But Jonathan, why there's so many sub-denominations in the Christian community, including Catholicism? Because interpretation is key there.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say safety is interpretable. It's not. Safety is, and safety does. Full stop. That's it. There's no way to, to smudge what the meaning of safety is. We'll go back to the job site. Same for you. How do you make your employees safer? We look at psychosocial in workplaces now, and it's becoming a much stronger push, even from WorkSafe Australia's perspective. And one of the things that they do have in line with the documentation is like a program, an EPA program, where you're providing staff that might be going through domestic and family violence, can't quite tell anybody about it at work because they're so embarrassed, but they know they can reach out to HR and or a manager and say, I need some counselling, I'm having some troubles at home, or I'm having issues coming into work without needing to identify what the issues are and have access to see a counsellor or to see a psychologist. Isn't that a great way to support your employees, to create that sort of that gap, to be a safe place? So when I work with, I've done some work recently with some organisations with the leadership about creating safer workplaces from a psychosocial model. And why is that critical? So if the leaders are informed, the documentation is informed, the documentation, your paperwork, sets the culture in your workplace. So that if somebody's being bullied in the workplace, they're going to grab that document. No, they have rights. And if they don't feel safe in the workplace, they're going to call WorkSafe Australia and know they're going to be heard. And that's why bodies like that are so important. So we can look at it from a micro, we can look at it from a macro, but the fundamental basics is safety. So we can wash it up and call it something else, but then it becomes something else. I don't want to misinterpret it. I want to bring it back to its pure essence and need. We need to be safer for all of our women, for all of us, for each other. That means when a girl walks out that door, we're not putting her down because she might be showing too much leg. I mean, what right do we have to judge another person? And it comes back down to decency. What's honour? How do we honour each other? Every human being has the right. It's that, idea of free will. That's a birthright, isn't it? to walk the way we want, to talk the way we want, to dress the way we want. And the question is, why are we so threatened by difference?
Because of insecurity.
Yeah. So when I hear young men slut shame a girl, again, makes me feel very sad and also very angry. Because that's an ideology, isn't it? To believe they have the right to put somebody down because of the way they choose to dress. If you turned inward and thought about why it matters so much to you and how you could be safer for that person by not judging her to start with. So removing the very human experience of being judgmental.
I also think that like men in general like would be experiencing insecurity just from like up until a certain age. Like insecurity goes with maturity.
Yeah, for sure.
So like how do you mitigate it? You can't. Like there's always going to be, I mean, we can definitely set things in progress. And I loved what you said about the job sites as well, like setting that in the paperwork, even from from like an emotional perspective, even maybe asking people or in the documentation, like, you know, bringing up like, are you feeling safe at home as well as like feeling safe on the job site?
Yeah,
you know,
I've worked with some organisations that actually have it written in bold capital letters. If you are experiencing domestic and family violence at home, they have a bit of a safety plan. Contact Lifeline, contact 1-800-RESPECT. And they also put, for example, in Victoria, Safe Steps is a really good one because these organisations exist to create a channel, a dialogue, a choice that somebody has somewhere to go because nobody should experience that. And if they do, nobody should be alone in that experience. We also have Orange Door. And it's a bit of an all-rounder where it provides, you know, first of all, if you're eligible, they'll help you, provide you with financial supporting, accommodation. It's really about sort of what's encompassing. What's it going to take for you to choose to leave that violence? What's it going to take? Is it going to take to your first threat of life? And for some people, they're not here to tell the story anymore. And that is disgraceful. So how are we doing better? Okay? We all have daughters. You've got a daughter. You do. I do. And anyone else that's listening, how do we create a safer space for our daughters? By creating safer men in our communities. That's the answer. Yeah. Why can't we protect each other? Why? What's it going to take for us to protect each other instead of harming each other? So, yeah, insecurity is a very sort of important silver lining when we're talking about a man's need to control, even a woman's need to control. Okay? But it's really the importance of once you can identify that you're a harm to others, what are you doing about it? So insecurity is a contributing factor and a big one.
Why is it so hard for like a female to leave when they are experiencing, like you said, that, you know, it takes, at what point are you going to leave or do something about it? And sometimes it leads to a loss of life. Why is it so hard? I'm
going to use the word hope because a lot of us women hope it gets better because we remember once upon a time it was better. It felt safe. There was a connection. There was attention. There was adoration. There may have been, you know, a lot of contributing factors to why women stay. Once the violence escalates and it becomes episodic and habitual, then most of the time it's they don't know how to leave. So maybe we need to ask another question. How can we support them to leave better? Okay? So I know there's thousands of reasons, and working in the therapeutic space with women that are calling up after an escalation where police have passed on the number and I might get a caller and we're having a chat about, you know, what led up to it, what was the aftermath, and it's just learning about, okay, well, what do you want? Sometimes they're not ready because they don't want to break up the family unit, so they suck it up. So why are we allowing them to suck it up? Why can't we?
Is there a way that you could then talk to, like you know that she's sucking it up for the sake of her family, to hold her family together? Is there a way that then we can work with that man instead to try and change him?
Yeah, I think that's where the police force do a great job, and because I've worked so closely with them, and And I know that they cop a lot of flack in sort of, other areas recently, but in the domestic and family violence work, it's like I said, it's an epidemic, so it's daily.
They take it seriously.
And they do. I've worked with some beautiful human beings, men and women, that work for Victoria Police that provide education to men. And some of them like heart-to-heart them after there's been an incident. And, we'll encourage them to call Men's Line. I think it's because it's a national number as well. And because, they work with people using violence, which a lot of the time are men. And then that's the first step. It's, can that person now take responsibility to acknowledge their offending behaviour and the damage the offending behaviour is having to the family? So again, it is about connection to community, connection to family. But I also want to say that a part of it is focusing on encouraging men to come forward. That if you are a perpetrator of violence in your family dynamic, in your home, well, how can we create and open up a dialogue? How do we bust this shit open to make you, what can we say that's going to help you? I wish I had the answer to that.
Yeah.
I wish I could say every single person that's ever offended, here are the community places I want you to reach out to, but are they going to do it?
Yeah.
Who wants to sit in their shame? Nobody's running to do that.
Is there a way you could say we could mandate it? So like if there was the process of like police being called to a domestic violent thing where then maybe there's a law that sends them to court and then the court.
Intervention orders do a lot of that
and
work.
The court says you by law have to do this course or.
Yeah, so sometimes depending on if they, one of the conditions maybe of being found guilty of a crime associated with domestic and family violence. I've heard and worked with some people that have then had to do programs, positive behaviour change programs. And there's a few
do they work?
Courses out there. They do if they choose it to work. Remember, if we believe in the power of the human choice, if we're open and we take it seriously.
Yeah.
You're not doing the same. So you can punch a hole once, twice, 3 times in the wall. Okay. Till when? Okay. If we remove that, what's something else we could replace it with?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how people live with it their whole lives, Like I feel like we've all experienced some form of, insecurities and like episodes or whatever, but like I feel like it's something that you almost very quickly want to snap out of. You want to see the other side. Like
you hope
how can you just want to be like that your whole life?
Yeah.
What would your advice be to someone that's in a scenario where they've got kids, so they've got multiple kids, they don't have a job, so they're relying on their partner to bring income, and their partner is on either drugs or alcohol.
Yep.
That's obviously a very common scenario.
Yeah, it is.
And it's probably one of the stickiest places to be in domestic violence because obviously there's drugs involved. You don't have your own finances.
Yep.
I feel like that's a really sticky point to be. What would your advice be to someone that came to you that was in that situation?
Multiple times I try and stay out of giving advice. I think just learning more about that person and what constitutes their choices. So again, not why are you choosing to stay? Why haven't you left yet?
Yeah.
What's holding you here? If this person, so people tell you who they are. And I know people have heard that and it's been something that I love hearing over and over again. Listen. People tell you through action. Listen. So again, if you're measuring this person's become unsafe, but I can't afford to leave. There's a way around that. We look at existing supports. Again, we look into community. We look into family. Is there somebody you trust that you can open up to so that you can feel the very thing that you're not getting at home is that support. So you go to safe people. Paul, I think with advice, it's cheap in the sense that it doesn't really help somebody.
Yeah.
I think what helps somebody is holding space and listening to them and asking questions, being really curious. I would always hope that what we can offer them, and you're in a position of leadership role, same with you, Jonathan, that we can start to use the word safe a lot more so that people can start associating safety with action. So if I'm angry and I'm on my way home and I've had a bad day at work, if I name it and my wife's had a bad day with the kids at home, instead of us getting into a escalated domestic incident where the police are going to get called, Can we start with saying my capacity is at 2% today? It's not a good day for me. And even say I need to isolate myself. That's taking responsibility. That's not being dismissive. It's identifying I'm not the safest person right now. There are other ways, but in order for us to navigate through change, we need to understand what's keeping people there too. It's information, isn't it? So that's my short answer for that question.
Is there a tool that doesn't exist that would be able to empower you to help that scenario end better, or like that doesn't exist that could be put in place?
Having the courage to tell the truth. We all have stories, and all of our stories are different, but a lot of our stories are the same. And, you know, people that are experiencing domestic and family violence often experience shame because of it. So they're not running around talking about it.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is be able to demystify the shame and say that, is it shameful to have the courage to talk about what you've been living with, the pain that you've been carrying? You know, it's hell living in that space.
Yeah.
It's hell. It's dancing with the devil.
For sure.
And people decide everyone's got a push point. You just hope you don't lose your life before you get to that push point. So how can we create safer spaces and people take more responsibility for their choices?
I feel like leaving, if it's an intense situation, obviously leaving is a great option. But if somehow you could divert it to helping the other person change their ways, because then you're fixing the problem and you're not breaking the family. But it's obviously it's
but again, what does that rely on? The person that's using the offending behaviour to reach out, to jump online. There are positive behaviour change programs you can do privately. They're usually about 6-week courses you can buy online that expose them to skills, some strategies, some scripted support about practice some of your go-tos when you start to feel your body. And I think a big part of it is, we talk about people that are in state of panic. I liken people in states of anger and rage where they feel out of control of their choices, likening it to the state of panic where your breathing is getting escalated and you can't quite control it and bring it back. You know, in the world of neuroscience, they're finding that moving 10 star jumps will snap you out of a panic attack quicker than a sour warhead will. More orthodox principles around what helps us ground. And I know that's something you're both very familiar with. So again, what I bring it back to is people showing interest to identify they're unsafe for their family. And there've been many family therapy success stories too, where people have identified that they're unsafe for their wife and their children, and they don't want to lose the family system. They don't want to break it up, but they have to be accountable first. And I said it before and I'll say it again, anybody that's accountable is somebody you can work with. Anybody that blames other people and does not take responsibility for their choices is then a person that stays unsafe.
Yeah.
Do you see where safety starts too?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
In accountability.
So we need to encourage men to become more vulnerable and be more accountable.
That's masculine.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
For sure.
You know, and men come in all walks of life. They're not just one kind of guy. We have beautiful gentlemen. We have men that are really introverted and that find it hard to name their feelings. But how are we creating relationships for each other where we're safe for each other as well? It's a give and a take. It's never one-sided.
Yeah. What does the healing journey look like for someone that does or is able to leave and gets out of a domestic or an abusive relationship?
It's long, it's hard, and it's a bit of a turn-off, if I'm going to be really honest, for a lot of people. A lot of them would rather stay in the destruction of what they're living with because it's familiar, and leaving is too scary because the prevalence of violence escalating when you leave is well documented, that it escalates and gets worse for a little while. So how encouraging is that stat?
Not very.
No. And for me, it comes back down to how do we make it safer? So somebody might have an incident where they've called the police, they've removed the offender from the home. That offender, once they're removed, the police will take out an intervention order and they're allowed to go back to the home.
Oh my God.
But then they got to show up before court on Thursday. So again, I'm not in the legal system and I won't speak on things I don't know.
Yeah.
But I will identify that, for anybody who is, what can we do as a community? It's power by numbers, right? How can we rally together? And we celebrated International Women's Day on Sunday. Did you guys even know it was International Women's Day? Yeah. What did you do about it?
Not much.
Well, they don't commercialise it like Valentine's Day because they can't capitalise on it, can they? But I think every day is International Women's Day. I think every day should be a day of celebrating each other. We don't know how long we have with each other. What have we got to lose if we swallow our ego and we're kind to each other?
Yeah, I agree. And I think we don't even need these days to dictate anything. It should be International Women's Day every day. It should be every day. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think people just need to nurture each other, love each other, care for each other and serve each other. Like, that's what we're here to do.
I feel like when I talk about this topic, I want to jump out of my skin. I want to go and I want to gather every single man that's ever perpetrated violence against women, and I want to find a solution. I want to jump out of this couch. I want to go and find a solution. But it isn't that easy. It's not that clear cut because I can't make choices for other people. So what can we do? Exposure, educate, inform. Information is power. But the right kind of information. Safety first, safety always. So for me, at the end of the day, we have programs like Are You OK Day? Well, great. And if I'm not okay, who do I talk to? Where do I go? Is it hard to leave? Yes, it's hard to leave. And most of the time, it's probably one of the biggest put-offs for people to leave. But how are we making it so that they can leave? It's a matter of life or death for a lot of people daily. And you don't know, because there's been so much historical documentation of the way women have died at the hands of men. Why aren't we in an uproar? Why is it still happening today? And that's where I can leave it on a massive question mark. And what are we doing about it? What are we prepared to do about it? Anyone that wants to reach out after this podcast, that watches it, that might have some ideas. I mean, I'm happy.
Let's work together, make some moves on it.
Let's put more pressure on the lawmakers. Let's look at it from a state, from a federal level. I mean, I'm happy to learn. I wish I knew more in that space, and that's where I don't know. But from a human lens, it's the least we can do for each other is create more safety.
Yeah, 100%. I think unity on all levels of life is important, and working together to create the outcome. Is there anything that we should have asked that we didn't ask?
No, not at all. I think we could. This dialogue will never stop. I'm going to go home, pick up the kids after this, make dinner, do a bit more work, jump in bed, go to sleep, and I'll be thinking about it. I'll be mulling. I'll be like, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? I'm sure it's something that is, sort of, it's never ending. But it's something that if we stop ignoring, keep talking about it, let's keep making our boys safer. Let's keep our nephews, our younger boys, but also our older guys too. If you know somebody who's a perpetrator of violence in their home, grab them, talk to them. Let's not be afraid of each other. So again, I want to be able to say, what can we do to offer more? And I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. Is that right?
That's it. I think we've planted the seed anyway, so we can touch on this. We'll have more conversations about it, and we'll see where it can lead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back.
Thank you so much for coming.
I wonder what episode 3 is going to look like.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Maria.
Take care, guys.
Lots of love. God bless.
Thank you so much.
If you're still listening, we're giving away 5 free bottles of C60 to the first 5 people who comment reflection on any of our pinned posts. God bless. Thank you.